Yeah. So hope you are able to see my shared screen. Yeah. Okay, so that's my email address, and if you have any queries, you want to contact me later, you can use that, or you can even use the Teams chat to contact me. Okay, so this class is about thermoregulation and fever. And we are all mammals, and mammals are able to maintain their temperature constant and also warmer than generally ambient temperature, and sometimes also colder depending on what the weather is. So we are able to maintain our temperature, and there are certain mechanisms which the body uses to maintain this temperature, and also maintaining temperature is crucially important. Okay, temperatures below a certain level or above a certain level, they are not compatible with life. They can result in death from various reasons. Okay, so maintaining body temperature is a very important component of homeostasis, and that's why this is such an important topic. So in this class, we'll be dealing with what are the mechanisms by which our body produces heat, and what mechanisms are available to lose heat, and understand these two roles and how it's involved in thermoregulation. And we'll learn a bit about some of the mechanisms that are involved in this heat production and heat loss, specifically relating to things like sweating and how our body temperature can be regulated by a structure in the nervous system called the hypothalamus, which is got like a temperature regulatory area. So we will be looking at that and how it's involved with autonomic nervous system. And then afterwards, after we finish discussing these basic mechanisms, we look at certain specific examples. Okay, for example, in a very hot area or in a very cold place, or exposure to water and wind, how does our body help? What mechanisms we have to maintain temperature? And lastly, we'll have a short discussion on thermoregulation in fever, or why do we get fever. So basically, this is in brief what we are going to be going through in this class. So why talk about heat at all? Okay, so all of our body reactions that take place, many of those reactions, chemical reactions that take place, they are necessary in order for our body to generate energy, and we use this energy to drive all the activity that our bodies require. For example, if we need to move our skeletal muscle, we need to hydrolyze an ATP molecule, and beg your pardon, and some of the energy released by the hydrolysis of that ATP helps the muscle to shorten. And as our muscle shortens, as our muscle contracts, we can, for example, we can flex our elbow, or we can extend our elbow, things like that. And also as a side effect, or as a resultant activity of these metabolic reactions that help us to make ATP and to hydrolyze ATP, heat is produced. Okay, so that's the primary reason why heat is produced. It's a byproduct of, it is also produced along with so many other chemical reactions that take place in our body. And this heat is necessary to regulate it and maintain our body temperature. Where do we get energy from? Most of the energy that we get is got because of whatever we take in. Okay, the carbohydrates that we consume, the fats that we consume, the proteins that we consume, they get metabolized by the body and they can get converted to energy. So we can temporarily store these molecules in our body to be a future energy source, or we can directly use them immediately as we absorb them, use them to provide us with energy. And what's the purpose of this energy? We need to perform some work, some activity, and also heat is produced as a result of that activity. So that means the greater the rate of metabolism, the more the heat produced. The less the rate of metabolism, the less the heat produced. So what do we need this energy for? We need this energy for obligatory energy expenditure. What does that mean? There's a certain energy cost involved in simply staying alive. Okay, it's our basal metabolism. So we all have something called a basal metabolic rate, or a BMR, and that includes all the energy that's required to keep our bodies in working order, but without actually performing any active task. Like for instance, of course, we need energy to make our heart beat and our neurons to fire and our respiratory system to work and things like that, but nothing extra. Okay, so that's called obligatory energy expenditure. So this energy expenditure will be more than if we are asleep. When we are asleep, certain of our physical activity, all those things reduce, our respiratory rate comes down, our heart rate comes down, then our energy expenditure will reduce at that point. Okay, so this obligatory must spend energy is basically the cost of staying alive. Then over and above that, we have physical activity. All the things that we do, from getting up from bed and walking around to having food, to digesting the food, to all of those activities. So all that amounts to physical activity. So over and above energy that we need to maintain our body's metabolism, we need energy for physical activity and for work. And also in certain situations, we need to spend energy to maintain our body temperature. Okay. So if we consider why we need energy for this purpose. We need energy to fuel our energy, our basic metabolism. We need energy to fuel all the physical activity that we need to perform. And we need energy to help us maintain our body's basic temperature regulating mechanism. So these are the three areas where we spend energy. And also the size of these boxes corresponds to that energy expenditure. More than half of our energy expenditure may be involved in maintaining our basal metabolic rate. And our physical activity depends on what is our physical activity, whether we are moderately active or whether we are very physically active or whether we're very sedentary. This will vary because of that. And adaptive thermogenesis also can change depending on our body composition, depending on what climate we are in. If we go to a cold place, then our body adapts. After a few days, it will adapt by increasing our rate of metabolism to keep our body temperature appropriate for that cold weather. Okay, so basically that's the reason why we need energy. If you look at the main fuels that we have in our body, the main energy sources are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And out of them, fats, as far as supplying energy is concerned, fats provide us with the most amount of energy. So fats provide us, if we choose a gram of carbohydrate, fat, and protein, fats will give us the most energy, 9 kilocalories of heat. If we completely combust fat, we burn fat right down to carbon dioxide and water, then we get about 9 kilocalories of heat compared to 4 and roughly around little more than 4 for proteins. Okay, so it's easy to understand why nowadays people criticize diets which are high in fat because it gives us a lot of energy. And if we don't use that energy, the tendency of our body is to convert it into stored molecules, to store the lipid, to make our adipose tissue grow and to store it there until we require that energy. Okay, so as far as providing fuel, fat is the most efficient. It provides, per weight, it provides a lot of energy, double the amount of energy compared to protein and carbohydrate. All right, so that's about the energy side of the story. Why is it important at all to maintain temperature? So we have briefly talked about this while discussing the LOs of this class. So basically we need to maintain our body temperature because most of the reactions in our body are catalyzed by enzymes. Okay, and enzymes are molecules. As such, they are very sensitive to temperature. Their activity and their form sometimes depends very much on temperature. If temperature is outside a very narrow specific range of temperature, then these enzymatic reactions are not going to happen properly. And because of these reactions not happening properly, then the cell function and organ function and the organ system function all will be impacted and can have serious consequences. So one of the factors that really regulates these enzyme activity and the form of the proteins which are present in our body, enzymes are protein molecules, is the temperature. Okay, there are other factors also. That's not the only factor. For example, maintaining pH of the body fluid is very important for the same reason, because it influences enzyme activity. Okay, so the most important thing is that temperature is necessary to maintain well because it affects all the chemical reactions that take place in our body and therefore the function of our body systems. So the current understanding, the most popular way of explaining how our human body temperature, how we regulate our temperature, is called the temperature homeostasis model. Okay, so the thinking is that there is a particular part in the hypothalamus, which is the area where this set temperature, the ideal, optimum, desirable range of temperature is fixed. And the body will, suppose our temperature falls below that ideal set level, then our body will engage in heat gain mechanism. And if our body temperature exceeds that mechanism, then our body will engage in heat loss mechanisms. Okay, so these regulatory responses, mostly they are reflexive, but they can also include conscious activity on our part. We will discuss as we continue in class. Okay, so in this case here, we have a set point at 37 degrees centigrade. And if our body temperature falls, then the regulatory mechanism will push our body back up, temperature back up to 37. Similarly, if our body temperature increases, then the regulatory mechanism should bring it back to 37 degrees centigrade. So this is a negative feedback reflex mechanism. Okay, and as any reflexes, as you already know, so we have a receptor which picks up that body temperature and a sensory nerve which carries this information into the central nervous system, okay, to an integrating center. For most of the temperature regulatory mechanisms, that's in the hypothalamus. And the integrating center does its thing and sends out motor impulses. It may be we want to start shivering. It may be that we decide, okay, we need to put on the fan now, it's too hot. Okay, so it could be both reflexive mechanisms and it could also be a change in our conscious behavior. Okay, so there's an effect like that. And because of that, a particular response is brought about and our temperature is returned to normal. The key point is that it's a negative feedback mechanism. Why do we say negative feedback? Because whatever the changes, if the temperature is decreasing, the response is to raise it back. If the body temperature is increasing, the response is to bring it back down. So it is a negative feedback mechanism. The principle. So the principal point in a negative feedback mechanism is that there is a set point. Okay, that's key. So the set point is really important in regulating temperature mechanism. Okay, are you able to hear, students?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So basically, that's the current idea or the current model that's being understood as how temperature regulation takes place. Okay. Yeah. So to re-emphasize, a reflex arc consists of the following components. So there's a stimulus. In this case, it's a change in temperature, and so we have temperature receptors. So we have temperature receptors which are located on our skin. And we have separate receptors for warmth and we have separate receptors for cold. And we also have temperature receptors which are located inside our body. Inside our hypothalamus also there is a temperature, central kind of temperature receptor. And from both those areas, information is carried to the integrating center. And in the integrating center, which is also the hypothalamus, then we have a particular mechanism which is initiated. And then we have a nervous pathway to implement that particular response. Okay, so this would be the typical way to describe any reflex arc, including that for regulating temperature. Okay, so as mentioned, it is a negative feedback reflex because whatever the change is, the reflex brings it back towards normal. Okay, so if there's heat loss, in, for example, exposure to cold, then regulatory mechanisms are triggered, which will restore the temperature to normal by the reflex that we have just mentioned. Okay, so similarly for if it's too hot, also the same thing will happen. And this capacity for us to maintain our body temperature by negative feedback regulatory mechanisms allows us to maintain our body temperature within a very fixed, narrow range. Okay, even though we are exposed to an environment where the temperature can change drastically. Okay, some days the temperatures, like last couple of days, minimum temperature has been around 22, 23 because it's cloudy and overcast. But we know that it can get quite hot. It can get to 35, 36 with very high humidity, and that makes it so uncomfortable. And yet we are able to survive, excluding things like air conditioning and all those things, you know. So our body is able to withstand wide fluctuations, and that allows human beings to exist in a variety of environments. The utility and the importance of this thermoregulatory mechanism just cannot be underestimated. Okay, some environment like in a desert where the temperature might be greater than body temperature, 42, 43, 45, okay, or negative 36, 35, 37 degrees centigrade in a really cold place. Equally possible for a human being to survive. Okay, and Now that's the meaning of homeothermic. That is, irrespective of what is our external environment, we are able to maintain our body temperature, and we are the source of our own body heat. Okay, so these are the two ways to describe our temperature regulatory mechanisms as human beings. So that's to provide a kind of an overview of how temperature regulatory mechanisms sort of work. Okay, if you look at body temperature per se, body temperature we can measure and we can understand body temperature as two sort of sides of the same coin. Okay, so we have our core body temperature, which is the temperature which is present when we measure it from an internal organ. Okay, like inside our viscera or within the skeletal muscle and inside our central nervous system. So this is core body temperature. And this is its core because it's located right within our body. And this core of our body is covered by a shell, which is mainly our skin and subcutaneous tissue. And there's constantly a heat exchange between these two. So if our core body temperature rises, then we are likely to exchange more heat to the shell. And the shell is more likely to lose or gain heat from the environment depending upon the situation. Okay, so that's the way that this works. So we have our core body temperature and then we have our shell. So when we measure temperature, like how we do scanning now for COVID, wherever we go, we have this temperature measuring machines. Even our university at the checkpoint enter, we need to scan our temperature. So that's measuring our shell temperature, our outside skin surface temperature. Okay. And that's called a shell temperature, whereas our core temperature might be measured when we go to the clinic. They use a thermometer and they put it inside the oral cavity, or better still, sometimes temperatures measured per rectally, which is like somehow that's like considered the most accurate measure for core body temperature. Sometimes we can swallow a digital thermometer, temperature sensor, and that can transmit measurements to a recording device outside, or sometimes we can introduce a probe into a particular body cavity or body structure to find out what is the temperature inside there. But those are all like not ordinary situations. Ordinary situations would be to measure skin temperature or core body temperature, most usually either oral or per rectal, especially per rectal, which is considered to be quite accurate. Okay, so that's about body temperature. So the main important point to note here is there is always heat exchange between our core, our shell, and the external temperature. Okay, heat exchange happens when there's a difference in temperature between the two regions. So heat will be passed on from an object which has a higher temperature to an object which has a lower temperature. If there's no difference, then there's net zero heat loss or heat gain. Okay, and if the ambient temperature, the environmental temperature is greater, then it's quite difficult to exchange heat with these. It's difficult for us to lose heat to the exchanger to the external environment. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. So we will look at what core temperature is, and then after that look at how we lose or gain heat. Okay, so the most common area I was telling you just now to measure core body temperature is rectal temperature. Rectal temperature is generally about half a degree higher than oral, and then we have all the other areas. So we can have temperature recorded from the axilla. What is axilla? Axilla is a word for armpit. Okay, so because there are two folds of skin present there, if it's well closed, then it gives a good approximation of core body temperature. Sometimes we can measure tympanic. You have those digital devices which they shoot infrared rays onto the tympanic membrane, or they put a probe in which fits in your ear. Okay, or you can even measure it from a superficial artery like the temporal. The temporal artery is a blood vessel, which sometimes you can see it on the side of your forehead, okay, over the temple. So that's how we can measure temperature. Core temperature is not like a static value. Okay, core temperature changes. It changes according to several factors. One reason why it changes is according to a circadian rhythm. So our body has a particular rhythm where our activity, also depending on our sleep pattern, but even outside the sleep pattern, there's a change in our body temperature. So tend to be higher as the day progresses, and as we go to sleep and rest, then our body temperature tends to fall. It's quite low, like in the earliest part of the morning. Okay, it also depends on how active we are. when we sleep, whenever we sleep, if we are even sleeping during the daytime, our temperature will drop slightly, because when we sleep, our body activity, including the tension within our muscles, relaxes when we sleep. So the amount of heat produced therefore will be less. Okay, and our core body temperature can also depend on how our emotional state is. So if we are very anxious, if we are very upset, there's a lot of sympathetic activity, skeletal muscle tension is very high, then our body temperature might be increased. And our body temperature can also be influenced by hormones. Okay, so in women, the activity of female sex hormones can alter body temperature. So in the menstrual cycle, in the second half of the menstrual cycle, we have a hormone called progesterone. There's a hormone called progesterone which is produced by the follicle cells, by the ovary, and this progesterone stimulates metabolism. It stimulates the respiration, it stimulates metabolism. So body temperature is likely to be higher in that part of the reproductive cycle compared to in the earlier part. In the earlier part, a hormone called estrogen predominates, and estrogen does not have as strong an effect as progesterone to stimulate body temperature. Okay, so that means even during pregnancy, temperature can increase. Temperature can increase because of the action of progesterone, and it can also increase because the mother is bearing the metabolic burden for mother and baby. The mother's metabolism needs to provide enough energy for respiration, for blood circulation, all those activities for the fetus and for herself, and the increased weight which she has to bear because of the pregnancy. All those reasons can also change body temperature. Okay, so apart from saying that metabolism is the main determinant, there are other factors which influence core body temperature, which include the circadian rhythm, which means the daily rhythm from morning to night and from night to morning, by our physical activity, by our emotional and mental status, and also by hormones. One example is ovulatory hormones, okay, female sex hormones like progesterone and estrogen. Also another hormone which you're all familiar with is thyroid hormones. Okay, so the thyroid hormone is supposed to be in charge of maintaining basal metabolic rate of the body, right? So we have increased amount of thyroid hormone, then our metabolic rate will increase, so our body temperature likely will follow the level of thyroid hormone present in our body. So that's another hormone. Another set of hormones which can affect our temperature are the catecholamines, which I have been learning about this last 2-3 weeks. So sympathetic nervous system and increased epinephrine and norepinephrine can also cause an increase in metabolic rate, which will also be reflected as an increase in body temperature. So there are several factors which can lead to variation in body temperature, and all these are normal things. None of these are considered disease factors, perhaps except if there's excess thyroid hormone, then that's considered hyperthyroidism. So that's a different story. Okay, so yes, body temperature varies. And what our body temperature ultimately is at, what temperature level we are at, what is the reading of our temperature, measurement of our temperature, depends on the balance between heat gain and heat loss. Okay, normally when we maintain our body temperature, it's a balance between heat gain and heat loss. And if we have increased heat production, then our core body, our temperature will rise. And if we have increased heat loss, then our body temperature will come back to normal. Or to start off with, if we have heat loss, then our body temperature will fall. Okay, so basically a balance between heat gain and heat loss determines what is our body temperature. So now let us look at all the mechanisms that result in increased heat production. Okay, so as we discussed earlier on, basal metabolic rate, physical activity are two of the most important mechanisms or ways by which our body produces heat. Okay, most of our energy that we use is taken up for basal metabolic rate, and the basal metabolic rate kind of tends to determine our body temperature also. Similarly, physical activity, since muscles are a large part of our body weight, if the muscles are active, and then the body is likely to produce a lot of heat. Okay, I'm sure you would have felt that when you exercise, one of the experiences that you feel, your body becomes so warm, isn't it? You start sweating, you really feel hot and uncomfortable. That's because of this heat which is released because of all the metabolic reactions taking place. Another process which does involve some heat production is digesting food. Okay, so actually there is even an energy cost to digesting and absorbing nutrients. Okay, there's really no such thing as a free meal. Depending on what food we eat and what the food contains, what's the composition of the meal. Okay, we need to spend money. I'm so sorry. Every class I do, I say money. I think we need to spend energy to digest that food. Okay, if our food contains a lot of protein or complex carbohydrates, then we need to spend some more energy to break down those into molecules which can be observed. Okay, so that increase in metabolism that's involved with digestion and absorption of a food, of a meal, is called the specific dynamic action, SDA, okay, or the thermogenic effect of a meal. That means even digesting a meal costs energy. Okay, and why? Because we need to produce enzymes that can digest it. Then those enzymes need to act. Then we need to have mechanisms to absorb those nutrients. We have to have ion channels to pick up the sodium, the glucose, and transport the molecules to work. We need energy to get those molecules inside the body and get into our bloodstream. Okay, so that's not a passive process. It does involve expenditure of energy, and it also depends how much energy we expend it will be determined by the kind of meal that we eat. Okay, and lastly, endogenous hormones that our body produces, like example epinephrine, norepinephrine, thyroid hormone, even hormones like glucagon. Glucagon is a hormone that our body produces when we have very low glucose levels, and glucagon helps our body to break down glycogen and to convert other substrates to glucose. Okay, so for that also, those hormones also can, glucagon also has a thermogenic activity, just like progesterone. Okay, so these are the basic mechanisms by which heat is produced. Once the heat is produced, what are the ways in which it can move from one part to how are the ways in which it can be exchanged? Okay, so back to basic physics. So there are three basic mechanisms: radiation, conduction, and convection. Radiation is transfer of heat through electromagnetic radiation. That means not by physical contact. If we are in a room with a cold object, then automatically heat will radiate from your body towards a cold object. Or if you are in a room with a warm object, like for example a fire or a heater or something, then the heat energy can come to you by radiation. Okay. Heat can also pass by conduction and convection. Conduction is by directly being in contact with either colder or a hotter surface, okay, or environment. Direct, that's conductive heat loss. And convective heat loss is basically heat that's carried by air currents. So we all know that when air heats up, it becomes less dense and it rises, and it's replaced by colder air, which in turn picks up heat from your body or from a heat source, and it also expands and rises up. So there's this current of air that's set up depending on the temperature of the air. So these convective currents, as they pass close to your body, they can be responsible for transferring heat away from the body surface. Okay, so these are the basic mechanisms by which heat can be lost. Out of them, convectional heat loss, all of the mechanisms of heat loss are quite important. Okay, but sometimes in certain situations, convectional heat loss can be really important. For example, somebody falls into a lake, okay, or they are wearing wet clothes. So the wet clothes will take more time to dry up, and so they will result in a greater sort of convectional heat loss as the person basically dries up. Okay, so these are the three ways in which heat loss or heat exchange can take place. In addition, there is evaporative heat loss. Okay, and why is this very special? This is really important because in several environments where we are, when our body temperature is actually less than the ambient temperature. For example, we are in a desert and it's 42 degrees outside. How are you going to lose heat from your body to the external environment by any of these processes, radiation, conduction, or convection? All of these processes require your body to be warmer than the ambient temperature so that you can lose heat to the ambient temperature. But if your environment is warmer than your own body, then evaporative heat loss is really important. Okay, that's because when water changes from liquid to water vapor, it absorbs heat, it uses up heat, latent heat of evaporation. You might recall from your school physics lessons. Okay, so evaporating water from the body surface is an important way to lose heat, especially when the external environment temperature is greater than your own body temperature, which makes radiative, conductive, and convective losses that much less effective. Okay, so for that reason, sweating is really important because sweat covers our body with a film of water, and this sweat can evaporate, and when it evaporates, it can result in cooling of the body. Okay, as much as half a calorie of heat can be removed when a gram of water evaporates from the body surface. So sweating is really, really important as a mechanism of heat loss. As far as evaporative losses go, some of the evaporation we are aware of. For example, by sweating, we know when we are sweating excessively or when we are not sweating much. We can make that up. We are aware, we are sensible to this, this method of cooling. Okay, but sometimes we have something called insensible vaporization, where we have water evaporating from body surfaces about which we really are not very conscious. For example, from a mucous membrane. Okay, when you suppose a person has a very rapid rate of breathing and the air is coming in and out very rapidly, then the mucous membranes can dry up and water can evaporate from there also. Okay, especially like in babies and all, this is quite important because baby size is different compared to us. So all these other small routes of heat and vapor loss become much more important in them. So insensible vaporization happens all the time. And but of course we can control sweating. Okay, so we have sweat glands, and sweat glands generally receive sympathetic nerve innervation. So the gland is arranged like a coil. There's a long tubular gland with a coil, and there's a duct which connects to the surface through the epidermis through a skin pore. Okay, through a sweat gland pore. And the thing is, as sweat is produced, generally at a very sort of moderate rate of sweat flow, our body gets enough time to reabsorb the electrolytes. Okay, so the tube, the duct, can change the composition of sweat and produce sweat. And if it's very rapid, then we might be losing electrolytes along with the water through the sweat. Okay, so basically that's about a sweat gland. So the gland secretes the sweat fluid, and the duct is responsible to modify it by taking out the sodium chloride. So generally, under normal sweating rates, we expect sweat to be quite hypotonic, okay, less electrolyte compared to water. And of course, we know that this is via cholinergic sympathetic nerves. So just sweat is generally hypotonic, but if we sweat at a very high rate, then it may not be that hypotonic. It could even be isotonic sweat loss at that point. That means you are going to lose electrolytes in the sweat. Okay, so yes, this is the most important point to note. It's the only way to cool our body when the ambient temperature is greater than our body temperature. So how do we get information about temperature? Okay, are you all okay so far? Any questions?
I don't think so, doctor.
Okay, you can hear, right? Yeah, sometimes I don't know whether I'm being muted or not, because in this mode I can't see I can't see the mic status. Let me know if you are not able to hear. Okay, so anyhow, so let us get back to how do we pick up this information regarding temperature. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, we have peripheral thermoreceptors, which are basically present on the skin. We have a separate set for cold and we have a separate set for warmth, and these pick up signals and send them to our temperature regulatory centers. Okay, so we have from our body surface, we have a pathway called the spinothalamic tract, which carries the nerve impulses from the skin all the way to our thalamus and also to our cortex and to other parts of our brain. Okay, so temperature signals responsible for regulating body temperature pass to a region called the hypothalamus. Okay, and that's which is the area for doing all the reflex regulations for body temperature. But the sensory nervous system also carries the information to our cortex. The cortex is like the outermost layer of the two cerebral hemispheres, and that's where all the complex thinking, thought processes happen. Okay, and if we want to do anything to improve our ability to withstand this temperature change, okay, so then we can alter our behavior. So those impulses would have to come through our cortex back to our skeletal muscle to basically do whatever action we want to do, wrap the blanket around tighter, or to go switch off the fan, or to turn on the aircon, or to decide to go take a swim, or whatever it is, So all those voluntary behavioral activities become part of our temperature regulating mechanisms. Okay, in addition to the peripheral skin or shell body temperature, we also have central thermoreceptors or receptors or neurons which are present inside the hypothalamus that respond to body temperature change. So whatever blood temperature is present that is perfusing through this hypothalamus, that will be picked up and that will be decoded as what is our core body or central thermoreceptor temperature. Similar to all the thermal receptors which are present in other internal viscera which will be sending impulses to this hypothalamus also. Okay, so within the hypothalamus, this sensory information will be integrated and two things will happen. Number one, whatever sensory information is given about what the temperature is, both from the center and from the periphery of the body, then the hypothalamus decides whether it matches the set point or whether it's higher or lower than the set point. And if it is higher or lower than the set point, then appropriately heat gain or heat loss will be instituted. Okay, so two things will happen. Number one, the sensory information will be integrated and compared to the set point. And number two, a decision will be taken. A particular action will be set into motion, which will make our body gain heat or lose heat. Okay, so basically that's what happens at the temperature regulating center. And what are these mechanisms to gain heat or lose heat? Okay, so basically one of the output system for the temperature regulating mechanisms, okay, the motor systems include vasomotor. Okay, that means to do with the vascular system, to do with the blood vessels. So how do the blood vessels help us to regulate our temperature? Okay, so if our temperature is very warm, then the signals that pass to our thalamus, our hypothalamus will decide that our body temperature is increased, and reflexes mediated via the anterior hypothalamus will come into play. And what is the main way that one of the main output of this will be reduced sympathetic activity to especially the skin blood vessels. Okay, so there'll be reduced sympathetic activity. That means that there will be less vasoconstriction. Okay, so the blood vessels on the skin will dilate, and that allows more blood to flow to the skin. So suddenly we have an increased blood flow to the skin, flowing closer to the surface. So heat can be lost by convection and radiation through the skin surface. Okay, and as this blood flows closer to the skin, it becomes cooler, and as it comes back to the body, the cooler blood flows along with all the warmer tissues and generally tends to bring the temperature down. And when this happens enough, then the body temperature will change, and the central and the peripheral receptors will get a new temperature signal, and perhaps this activity can be reduced. Maybe there will not be so much of reduction in the sympathetic tone. Maybe it can come back more towards normal. Okay, so basically that's what will happen. So we have, by changing the vascular tone. Vascular tone means how much of constriction or what is the status, is it very constricted or is it very dilated? By changing that status more towards vasodilation, we can direct more blood flow to the skin, which increases convective and radiative heat loss and helps to cool the body. So that's one way of regulating body temperature. Okay, so heat can be lost through convection and radiation in the situation. On the other hand, if we are cold, if our skin surface is cold, if our core body, central body temperature has fallen, then in that way, through output to the posterior hypothalamus, we have an increase in the sympathetic adrenergic activity, which increases vasoconstriction. So less blood flows to the skin. The blood is kept more away from the shell of the body, more towards the core. And that makes sense because if the blood flows close to the skin, it's going to get cooled. Okay, so to prevent, less blood will flow closer to the skin and the skin will kind of get bypassed. So our core body temperature will fall less. Okay, that's the way to understand this. So the previous was vasoconstriction. Here is an example of vasodilation. Okay. The other thing that can happen, the other efferent motor system that can get active is our somatic motor system. Okay, we can decide to actively move our muscles. That's a voluntary activity, or more importantly, we can do these two things. Our muscle tone can increase. Okay, so this is not consciously. Okay, it's happening as a reflexive mechanism. You will always notice if you go into a cold room and you not like well prepared for that temperature, then you'll find that your neck and back muscles are quite painful and fatigued at the end of the day. Okay, that's because of the cold. Those muscles maintain a high tone and your muscles are fatigued at the end. And maintaining the high tone means it goes into a more sort of partial state of contraction, and it's more contracted, so it's producing more heat. Alternatively, if the temperature drop is quite bad or we are not very able to regulate our body temperature, we can begin shivering. So what is shivering? It's nothing but a back and forth contraction, relaxation, contraction, relaxation, contraction, relaxation of our skeletal muscles. Okay, and we know that contracting skeletal muscles is one of the way to produce heat. Okay, so we have this oscillating contractions of the muscle and relaxation, which helps to produce more heat and keep our body warm. And lastly, we can take a decision to do something. We can stomp our feet, or we can jump up and down, or decide to move around the room a bit so that we can warm our body up. So even our somatic motor system is now taking part in this regulation. Some of the things are automatic, some of the things are reflexive, like increase in muscle tone and shivering, but we can also do something voluntary. We can decide to move, okay, or in this case, like whatever, this dance, walk like an Egyptian, or whatever that is. Okay, we can increase the amount of heat produced by the body. Okay, that's the third way in which we can regulate body temperature through the motor system. So we can have vasomotor. Okay, so we can have we can have vasomotor, and we can also have somatic motor. Okay, to increase our body temperature. Okay, so to summarize, so our receptors pick up the temperature change either shell or within the core of our body and send it to the hypothalamus. In the hypothalamus, it's compared to the set point, and heat gain or heat loss is selected. Usually the anterior hypothalamus is in charge of receiving the signals and decoding the signals and deciding upon the action. And the anterior hypothalamus and the posterior hypothalamus can both be involved. So the anterior hypothalamus will be involved in heat loss and the posterior hypothalamus for heat gain. And ultimately, whatever decision is taken, it will influence our blood vessels, vasomotor tone, our sweating, sudomotor. Sudo means for sweating, okay, SUDO. It refers to skin sweating rate. Sudomotor, it can affect how our hormones are released, and it can definitely affect our conscious behavior. So these are all the ways in which the reflexes can help us regulate our body temperature. Okay, so far all right? Yeah, so we have about 15 minutes remaining at this point. So in a newborn baby, yes? Any question?
Sorry, doctor, can you explain what was sudomotor again?
Sudomotor is regulation of sweating. So when we are hot, then the sympathetic nervous system will increase the amount of sweat produced. And if we have more sweat produced, then the skin surface will, the water will evaporate from the skin surface, and evaporation causes cooling. So that the nervous activity to the sweat gland is called sudomotor. So the sympathetic activity to the sweat gland is called sudomotor. Okay?
All right, thank you, doctor.
Yeah. Okay. So back to our current, yeah. So in babies, okay, so now we know that motor activity is, vasomotor activity, sweating are all important ways to regulate heat. Okay, but muscle activity in a baby, especially a newborn baby, is not very significant because a baby's muscles are so small. Okay, compared to the size of the baby, the amount of heat that the baby's muscles can produce are not quite as much as compared to adults, in the sense that shivering may have a limited way of helping the baby warm the baby's body up. Okay, instead the baby has a special type of adipose tissue called brown adipose tissue. Okay, generally adipose tissues looks white, and it's supposed to be sort of like not active tissue. Okay, simply just like storing energy. Okay, but brown adipose tissue has a lot of mitochondria, and they have certain processes in the body where they can they can simply convert all the energy into heat, and they don't trap any of that energy by forming ATP. Okay, so normally we use you can simply this at the moment we'll just ignore this diagram. What it means is that normally when ATP is produced, some heat would be produced. In brown tissue, brown adipose tissue, no ATP will be produced. Instead, all will be released as heat. Okay, so brown adipose tissue is an important way that the baby uses to maintain its body temperature. And brown adipose tissue gets a lot of sympathetic nerve activity, so it can increase the amount of heat produced for the baby. Yes? Any question? Okay, so this whole business of brown adipose tissue producing heat is because of uncoupling. Okay, normally the mitochondria should actually produce ATP, and then a little bit of heat is produced as a sort of a side effect. But in this situation, no ATP is produced and only heat. Okay, so that's the thing. So a brown adipose tissue actually looks brown because it's so full of mitochondria. White adipose tissue otherwise is just like nucleus and one globule of fat inside, storing all the triglyceride inside the nucleus, inside the cell. Okay, and you can see here, this is a nerve ending. So this nerve ending is probably a sympathetic nerve which is going to stimulate this fat cell. Okay, and one of the latest sort of findings now is that the thing is that babies are supposed to have a lot of brown adipose tissue, and as we grow up, then the amount of brown adipose tissue decreases because we have all these other ways of maintaining our body temperature, like our muscle size grows, we know to eat, we can change, we can, we become more able to protect our body, that sort of thing. Okay, but now there's a research that says that one of the targets for weight loss management can be by converting more fat to brown fat. So it's more able to burn up the energy rather than store it as fat. Okay, so that's what this article is about. It's quite an interesting read, but of course this is not at all necessary for this class. It's just a fun thing to know. Okay, it's like quite a current, I think the last 2 years this research is from. Okay, so now that we have a basic idea of heat gain and heat loss, okay, let's kind of put this into a table and think about responses to heat gain and heat loss. Okay, so if we are subject to some kind of cold stimulus, if our body temperature decreases for whatever reason, it could be because we are exposed to cold, it could be because something has happened to our body, so we can't produce heat anymore. So when we are in a cold situation, heat production will increase, heat loss will reduce. By heat production, we will have increased muscle tone, shivering, and in newborn babies, non-shivering thermogenesis, or if it's a prolonged exposure, then we can have increased thyroid hormone activity, and all these will increase the heat produced. And we can prevent heat loss by having vasoconstriction and reduced sweating. Okay, so these two will help us to maintain our body temperature, increased heat production and reduced heat loss. And generally, response to cold, the coordinating center is the posterior part of the hypothalamus. Okay, we can also change our behavior. We can decide to do things. We can decide to eat some food. We can go and put on the heater or put off the fan. We can change the temperature setting on the dial, or we can do physical activity. Okay, or also we can assume suppose we are sleeping, then we might assume a posture where our body surface is less exposed to prevent heat loss. Okay, we can hunch up, or we can curl up, or assume a fetal pose, or we can wear better clothes to prevent heat loss. Okay, so that could be a response to cold. On the other hand, a response to heat, then our heat production mechanisms will come down, but our heat loss mechanisms will increase. And these are coordinated via the anterior hypothalamus. So our muscles will relax. You notice how you feel so apathetic in the heat. The only thing you want to do is lie down and sleep. You have absolutely no desire to do anything physical. Okay, so you can become very apathetic it's basically too hot to move. You only want to like perhaps maybe drink a cool drink or something. You're not interested in eating anything too much. Or you could be a situation where our skin is dilated, blood vessels are dilated and we are sweating profusely and trying to cool our body temperature like that. Or we can assume a posture when we sleep. We are not going to be in the fetal position for sure. We are going to expose all of our body as much as possible to lose heat. We can choose to change our clothing or to use a cooler or a fan, or we could get into the water or immerse ourselves in a cold bath or something like that to increase heat loss. Okay, and these reflexes are going to be mediated through the anterior hypothalamus. Okay, so basically in different combinations and permutations of heat gain and heat loss, that's how our body manages to bear with the changes in temperature. Anterior hypothalamus for heat loss or response to heat, and posterior hypothalamus for response to cold. Okay, so as stated in the LO, we have about another 10 minutes left. So suppose somebody is in a desert, okay, very high temperature, 120 must be something like 55, 56, 57 degrees centigrade. Okay, can you think about what the challenges might be in this high temperature? So the one thing is we cannot lose heat easily. We cannot lose heat by radiation, convection, or conduction, because our body temperature is less than the ambient temperature. Our body temperature is 37 normally, and outside now it is more than, it's close to 50, okay, 52, 53. I'm not exactly sure what 120 is, but must be somewhere around between 55 and 60, something like that. So how will our body lose heat? Okay, so the one way of heat loss which will help is heat through sweating. So if we are able to sweat, if we are not dehydrated, if we have sufficient fluid in our body, then we can sweat and that we can lose heat. And how will we sweat? Through the anterior hypothalamus, increase in sympathetic, decrease in sympathetic discharge will make our blood vessels dilate, and so we can lose heat. And the sympathetic activity to the skin will increase so that we can, to the sweat glands will increase so that we can sweat more and lose heat. Our metabolic rate might be less. We don't do any physical activity, so we'll be quite like sedentary and lying down and not wanting to move around much. Okay, so these are all ways. The important point here is that radiation, convection, conduction, heat losses are not going to be too much, so we have to think of other ways to lose heat. In a situation like snowing or skiing or something like that, where the temperature is very cold, okay, so the main thing here is that we are dressed appropriately. You definitely are not going to go skiing if you're not dressed warmly. The challenges to skiing are, apart from the cold, okay, the surface on which you are present is very cold. It's going to be 0 and below. Also, the other challenge will be wind. Okay, as the wind passes over your skin, it's going to increase the chance of having heat loss. Convective heat loss will be much greater. What they call the wind chill factor. You feel more cold if it's just cold and there's wind, or rather than if it's just cold only. Okay, so that's the challenge with the snow and the skiing. Number one, the surrounding is quite cold. Number two, the wind factor, because skiing generally happens at a high speed. So that will be the challenge. But of course, you should be ready for that. Our main defense against that is that we are using the warm things and that our physical activity is increased in this situation. Okay, on the other hand, falling into a lake with low temperature, 37 Fahrenheit is quite low. Okay, so that will be like somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 or 20 degrees. So that's quite cold, possibly even lower than that. Okay, so getting into cold water, what kind of a challenge does that constitute? Okay, so in this case, a person is falling into the water. That one would presume they are not ready for the cold water. They're not wearing a good thermal protective suit and this and that. They're just like in their everyday clothes and they fall into the water. Okay, so they are going to be cold because of that. And when they come out of the water, they're going to be wet in addition to being cold. And we know that when water evaporates, it makes our body cooler still. So they will be facing heat loss much more compared to simply being exposed to the cold, because they are wet and they are cold as well. Okay, so that will be the challenge for them at that point. And also the thing is that the temperature drop can be very rapid. That's the other dangerous thing that can happen. If the temperature we are exposed to, the fall is quite slow, we can somewhat try to accommodate the temperature. Our wind vasoconstriction and all those changes can happen. Okay, but if it's very rapid like this, it can rapidly push our body into hypothermia. If you are exposed to cold like this, like maybe not falling into the lake, but to a cold temperature, maybe mountaineering or something, then cold thermal injuries can become a problem. Okay, because of the extensive vasoconstriction, then blood supply to the skin can be reduced. Any ischemic damage can happen, like frostbite. Okay, digits can get ischemic because of this very severe vasoconstriction and damage from the cold. Okay, so that's another challenge that can happen. But snorkeling in temperatures like 80, that the temperature is not so cold. Okay, we are not exposed to such severe cold. I think 80 must be somewhere between 35 and 40 degrees centigrade, very comfortable. But the thing is, when we get out of the water, we'll be wet. Okay, so that will make heat loss by evaporation something to think about. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. So drying off, not wearing wet clothes is important to maintain temperature in these particular situations. Okay, so this is basically an idea as to how to discuss a particular problem. Okay, but having said all this, the exposure to these cold environments or to these hot environments depends so much on the state of the person. What do I mean by that? If the person is acclimatized to the cold weather already, if the person is fit, by fit I mean their cardiovascular fitness is good. Okay, what is the degree of insulation provided by their subcutaneous tissue? What is their body mass? Okay, how are they hungry or not? We know that the muscles can produce heat by contraction, but the muscles need glucose and carbohydrates. So if we are not able to provide, if the person has been exposed to cold for a long time, then they are likely to suffer much more than if it's a very acute and sudden drop in temperature, because their muscles will be starved. They will not have any substrate available for them to, to burn and to contract. So that's something also that can be kept in mind. Okay, in the sense, what I mean is that there's no exact formula to say that between this and this is definitely what's going to happen. Between that and that's definitely, depends on all these factors. That's one thing that I wanted to share. And the last thing that I wanted to share is that sometimes hypothermia is instituted as a treatment. Okay, there are two situations medically where hypothermia is important. Okay, so now all the examples of hypothermia, we are talking about falling in the lake, etc., etc. That's accidental hypothermia. But there are times when intentionally patients are treated with hypothermia to help them have better outcomes. During certain surgeries and during certain procedures, a decision might be taken to reduce the body's metabolism to prevent damage to the tissues, and hypothermia may be induced. Okay, so there are certain times where it's intentional, but also in certain situations when the body is exposed to hypothermia, it's not intentional, but it happens. For example, a patient is going for surgery and is given anesthetic medicine. Okay, so during those procedures, sometimes the amount of sympathetic activity and the amount of muscle activity can decrease, and because that decreases, then the person's temperature falls down. So even anesthesiologists also would need to watch out for what's the patient's body temperatures, especially suppose like it's a really long procedure. It's taking more time than was planned in such kind of situations. So that is about hypothermia. Okay, and do we warm up the body excessively? Do we use hyperthermia as treatment anytime? Not really, except for the situation of fever, which brings me to the discussion on fever. Okay, so fever is an example of thermogenesis which has gone wrong. Okay, so there is an elevation of the body's temperature. So certain chemicals produced by the white blood cells as a result of the inflammation, they can interfere with the hypothalamus and make the body's set point temperature be higher. Okay, So these chemicals which cause fever are called pyrogens. Pyro refers to fire, right? So pyrogen means something that causes fever. So basically the mechanism that we understand it is that if there is some toxin that's produced, endotoxin produced by a bacteria or a result of any inflammation or any other pyrogenic stimulus, it will stimulate it. These chemicals will act on white blood cells, and these white blood cells produce cytokines, and these cytokines go to the hypothalamus and meddle, and in the hypothalamus it results in the production of prostaglandins. And these prostaglandins act on the hypothalamic neurons and change the set point in the body. So normally if the set point temperature is 36 point whatever, it will change to maybe 39. Okay, and then now your body is going to be comparing the temperature sensor, the temperature receptors temperature, which is 36, 37, and comparing it with this new set point, which is now 39. And what does your hypothalamus conclude? The hypothalamus concludes that you are cold. And so it initiates heat gain mechanisms, and you start, perhaps you have a shiver or a chill or a rigor, and then your body temperature increases and now you have a fever. Okay, so basically that's the mechanism, that's the way in which fever is produced. Okay, so the most effective way to actually treat this fever that we have today is to stop the prostaglandin synthesis. Okay, so drugs like paracetamol, that's where they actually act. Okay, so that prevents the temperature set point from changing, and you get back your normal temperature. Okay, so the drugs which treat the fever, they are called antipyretics. So they may not have other anti-inflammatory actions, like they may not be very useful for analgesia or for reducing swelling or anything like that, but they are very useful for treating pyrexia, to reduce the body temperature. Okay, so it looks something like this. So here's the normal set point. And here's the episode which causes the fever, perhaps the endotoxin or anything like that, which stimulates the production of cytokines, which stimulate the hypothalamic neurons to produce prostaglandins, which resets the temperature to a higher level. Okay, so now there's a mismatch between what the skin temperature receptors are saying or the core body temperatures receptors are saying and what is the set point. So now the decision is to engage in heat gain. So there will be chills and rigor. Chills will be basically the shivering, and the rigor means the stiffness. And the temperature will slowly rise because of all these metabolic activities. And when it reaches 39, then the patient is okay. There's a match between the temperature and the set point. So no more shivering and all those things. But the person has a raging fever at this point. Okay, then if you give the antipyretic, that will stop the prostaglandins from acting on the hypothalamus and set the set point back to whatever it was. And now the person's body temperature is high, but the set point is back to normal. So the hypothalamus interprets it as increased body temperature and stops heat production and increases heat loss. So that's when you begin to sweat and you become all flushed in the face, and the sweat is pouring out of the body in an attempt to bring the body temperature back to normal. Okay, so we have vasodilation and sweating at this point, and then back to normal. Okay, either the endotoxin was removed or an antipyretic was instituted here, and that's why the temperature set point came back to normal. Okay, so there's a little quiz which you can try also, and the main references for this are taken from Ganong, okay, and from Guyton. Also, there's a very interesting chapter. You can read if you have the time. It's a bit of a long chapter, but it's really nice. If you have the time, maybe later on when you finish your exam or something like that, you have some time, you can look at this. It's a really nice chapter. It gives you a kind of a clinical way to look at it as a person who's going to, as a healthcare person, to look at fever. Okay, so we don't need to do the feedback now anymore, but these are the main references for this class. Okay, so if you have any questions.
Sorry, Doctor. I have a question. With
Okay.
like
Yes?
when, sorry, why is why is the posterior hypothalamus like say in cold situations?
Right.
Yeah.
That's honestly, there's no way to answer. I mean, as far as I know, that's how we know that it is. Okay, there is no reason why it is the posterior hypothalamus, except we can say that those neurons are temperature sensitive neurons. Okay, that's the only answer I can give you for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I need to, yes?
Hi, Doctor. Can I ask what is set point? Is it called body temperature?
The set point is, see, the idea that we have about a set point is a hypothesis. Okay, it's a model which we use to explain temperature regulation. So the current thinking is that the neurons somehow are able to say that when a particular temperature is sensed, in that situation, then no heat gain, no heat loss. So that's the set point. Okay, if the body temperature is detected above that point, then heat loss. If the body temperature is detected below that point, then heat gain. So that's the thing. It's like in your automatic iron, you know, how you have the thermostat, something like that. So it's a hypothesis that the scientists have to explain how our body regulates its temperature. Is that okay?
Oh, yes, Doctor. Thank you.
Okay.